So I'm a pretty big fan of Zack Snyder. Oddly enough, Man of Steel was the movie that got me into making movies and wanting to be a filmmaker. It was the first movie where it was, oh, production is like a real thing and directing is a job that people can have. It became tangible at that point for me. And I'll forever be grateful for Zack Snyder for making that movie and getting me into wanting to make movies. As odd as that sounds for film buffs out there. And look, is Zach a perfect director? No, I think he can sometimes not get the best performances out of an actor. I think sometimes he gets incredible performances out of an actor. I think he can let some cringy dialogue slip through. But whatever you think of his films, there is no denying that he's one of the most gifted, visually stunning directors of our generation. And I think he deserves so much accolade for his work. And one thing that I love in particular about his style, if you will, is his grading on skin tones is so good. It's like contrasty, but there's, and there's grit, but there's like halation on to give it this dreamy vibe that we'll get to in a minute. And I'm just a big fan, and I've wanted for a while to sort of just sit down, take an image, and try my hand at getting a Zack Snyder style image. So that's what we did today. I have a little note treat set up. We're going to go through what I did to emulate that style a bit. A couple of notes. I'm shooting this on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. This is, I believe, a 16 millimeter Mikey Prime Cinema lens. This is just for an interview thing that I was doing for a shoot. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm not going to mess with any of the raw data, and for whatever reason, it's not letting me, even though I always shoot in RAW. Shout out Frono's Photos. But it doesn't matter. We're not going to touch that anyway. I will also note in the color management, I am using a custom information here. So I have the timeline color at DaVinci WG Intermediate just to get way more data out of the footage here. Also have it set to 709, but you will notice in my color space transform, I have the output set to 2100. That's because if I go to 709, let me turn this on. You see, wow, what a difference, right? So much more information, but it's kind of too much information. And I would rather, especially for something like this where we're going to be dulling the image anyway, I'd rather get more information out of it, bring some stuff up versus take things out and bring things down. So that's what we're going to do. BMCC 4K on both of those, blah, 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 blah. Not too much going on with that. Next, I have what I'm calling balance, which is essentially just the first grade on it. You can see what that does. I'm just trying to get a whiter, truer white here. Adding some magenta. I'm warming it up a little bit. I'm also darkening some of just a little red in the highlights, and then just overall the shadows a bit. It was just a bit much, I feel. Just balancing out the image, not too much going on. One thing I also like to do is I'm a big fan of sharp images. I know people say you don't need to make it sharp to make it cinematic, and a lot of people they make it blurrier, and I don't like it. Especially for something like this, I want tactile lines. I want to fucking feel like I'm there, and I could stroke that man's face and feel all the ridges. That sounds weirder than Okay, so turn down some blur radius, and then I also like to take off some noise because I want a clean, sharp image. I know it's not what everybody likes, but that's what I like. So just a little bit of that in that as well. And again, I like my sharpness. So I did a bit of a texture pop, not too much, especially on the eyes. That's what I love. Like in my first feature, I have a shot, maybe my favorite shot in the movie, of my Aunt Susan. And I love all the lines and the ridges. It's just, she's been through some shit, it's just nature. I'm a fan of it. I like the lines. So texture pop. A little bit of film grain. Everybody loves their film grain, but some people overdo it. I'm not trying to overdo it, especially for this shot. We want some film grain. We like the texture that it gives. Not too much, but just enough. You probably can't really tell in the image here, but you can tell in the scope. So see if I do the film grain and the texture pop together, just see how much more detail and everything you get. Now we get to the reason that we're here, the skin tones. So I have a few different parallel notes here. First, skin. Now, when I turn that on, you're like, holy shit, that man needs to see a dermatologist. It's a lot. It's quite a bit. I get it. So what I did is I went to the color picker here and I isolated just the skin tones. Now, I obviously got some other things that I probably could take off, maybe put a box around them and just sort of track that. But this is just a test shot. I'm not too worried about it. So in that, obviously, we added some contrast. We added some saturation. I boosted the color a bit as well. Took down some shadows to add some contrast, brought out some highlights to make those pop as well. And again, just a little bit more sharpness. Makes the eyes really sort of stand out, I think. And it's a lot. It's too much, but that's because we're going to be desaturating it later, and we want the skin to really stand out. So that's why we have that. I have another one for the skin as well, just some grain. Again, not too much, but just enough to give it some texture. And then some halation. Again, just on a skin there. But that's what gives that dreamy vibe. I have this sort of as a reference that I was using, and you just see it feels otherworldly. It feels like an art piece because of that dreamy sensation that you get with a lot of these highlights, and it works well really within the skin tones. And then I have a very simple rest of this to go. So grade, which I'm just darkening everything, mainly just the shadows and the midtones. I'm not really touching the highlights because I can bring them down and whatever, but Zack Snyder has really lovely backgrounds. Again, like something in this big sunlight peaks coming through, and it's not a super flat image, honestly. So we're gonna leave that up there. And so skin tones would be over here, and I pretty much desaturated everything else just a little bit. It's a little hard to tell because everything is getting darker as well, but especially these greens and these blues, the saturation just goes down to make him stand out even more. Then we have a color, which we're going to desaturate quite a bit. I've hit a 35% desaturation here. And then in my Lume vs. Sat, his skin tones are about here. So I kind of left those where they would be. And then everything else, even the highlights, the shadows, everything else, taking more saturation off just to make sure, again, that red stands out. Also added a little bit of warmth, a little bit more magenta. But, you can go heavier with it if you want. You can go crazy with it if you want. I'm not going to. Let's do like that's too much. 250. Still doing it. Okay, 250. Sure. But yeah, just warming it up a little bit, desaturating overall image just so it looks like it's all in the same field. And this is just something that I like to do. I like my blacks to be black. So what I do is I go into my picker and I isolate everything that would be my true blacks, all my darks. And I pretty much make it to 0 desaturation. I have a 10% or 10% saturation, but it's essentially 0. Take down some of the shadows just to make sure that, it's not too faded. You can see it's a little blue, it's a little bright, and just turning that down just so the blacks are black. But essentially, that's kind of it. So this is our starting point, and this is where we end. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, I'm done talking.